Hey everyone, our latest podcast, we sit down with the co-founding president of the Pelorus equity group, Rob Sechrist. He finances some of the biggest names in the cannabis industry. And in this podcast, he outlines why federal legalization is not all what it's cracked up to be. What does that mean? As well, he outlines some key things to look for when it comes to reevaluating your strategy towards investing in the cannabis landscape. What are they? He breaks it all down right now in our latest podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to the Trade to Black podcast. I am your host, Shad Dales. As usual, thank you so much for watching us as well. Always click that bell for all notifications. And if you like what we produce, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We got a hot topic again this week. We continue to ride the safe banking train and have on some of the most reputable people in the cannabis landscape in the U.S. and what they're hearing and what we could see and how the overall industry develops. So again, we'll ask the question, how do you see this all unfolding? Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. As well as we get into today's podcast, all views on the Trade to Black podcast and the guests on this podcast are purely opinion. You should not treat any opinions expressed by us or guests as investment advice. The views on this podcast are solely intended to be informational and are not investment advice. Okay, let's welcome in our guest of the week. Big guest, man. Lives out in Newport, California, where life, I would think, is pretty good. He's the co-founder and president of Pelorus Equity Group. Let's welcome in Rob Sechrist. Rob, great to have you. How are things?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. We're doing all right over here. It's probably not as hot as most of the rest of the country.
Yeah. Well, wanted to have you on as well. We welcome in our lead financial writer, Benjamin A. Smith. Ben, how's the week going, brother?
Week's going very well. Yeah, it's great. It's watching the market action as always.
How is the market doing actually towards the end of the week? Haven't got a chance to look. I've been busy.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a rise today. Some people expected perhaps even more because the Canadian regulators banned naked short selling, but we didn't quite get that uplift that some people were talking about. But it was positive nonetheless.
Yeah. Well, wanted to have you obviously on, Rob. We've had a lot of conversation the last couple of weeks with some pretty big name people, obviously, in the space. And I want to begin, it was brought up last week and again about safe banking in a recent post that I made on LinkedIn. And you commented on how everyone wants to see this pass, but the Dems are not going to let the bill go through without social justice and equity reform being included. So a lot of people that follow this industry have an idea as to what that means. But for somebody new watching this, explain to our viewers the details of what that means. And most importantly, what the potential outcome will be pertaining to it, in your opinion.
Sure. So I just want to unpack it a little bit first before I respond to the question. So most people think about cannabis and legalization is a broad topic. And there's actually two components to it. One is the regulatory reform to go forward and make it legal for companies, and that so it can be a normal business out there or more normal. And the other side of it too is decriminalization. And so you need to always separate those two categories apart when you talk about federal legalization, because they're often conflated in together. And so what my point is there is that many of my peers in the industry are really hoping and looking for this to pass any type of federal or legislation that deconflicts state policy from federal policy or full legalization. But it's so much more complicated and nuanced than I think most of them know. And I think that they are in a world where it's all that it's about to happen at all times. And that's important for them too. It's important for their lobbyists to continue their jobs to make everybody think that it's there. But in reality, I've been following politics very closely for more than a decade. I've got a personal relationship with Cory Gardner, the great state of Colorado, who had been the co-author of the original States Act with Elizabeth Warren back when the Republicans still had control, and he had the votes to pass it, which most people don't know. He had more than 60 votes to pass it, but McConnell would not let it go because Elizabeth Warren was a Democrat presidential candidate. What Mitch McConnell said, and this is where people just don't know politics well enough to know, is that because Elizabeth Warren was a president electoral candidate, that all the rest of the Democrats would have said that this bill didn't go far enough, just purely to get the airtime. And by making those comments, the rest of
Wow.
the Democrats would have not been willing to vote for it because they didn't know which way it was going. And so these are things that people don't know behind the scenes. McConnell didn't want to risk having Republicans on the record when it's more important to win the next election than something in this category, which is cannabis is called a non-voter issue. And what that means in political language is that both parties are pro-cannabis in differing degrees. And so a voter is not switching their vote to vote for cannabis because they both are. So nobody's going to burn up any political capital to push this through. So generally, if cannabis was to get reformed, you're going to need the executive branch and majorities in both
Right.
the House and the Senate. And I just I don't see us ever having a 60 vote, somebody having a 60 vote majority in the Senate at any time, given how divided the country is at this point. And so even if you had all those things at the same time, which generally the first term of the new administration, there's no way that a new administration, whichever party it is going to burn their political capital for something as small as $40 billion a year industry when they could be changing free housing for everybody in the country, or whatever policy it is that they're going for. They're going to be driving something that is not a non-voter issue. So I have always maintained that I
So
don't
it's not a
see
concern.
any significant cannabis reform happening for a long time, at least into the next administration. Now, there possibly could be some minor bill that passes, but it's kind of a mute issue to us because most retail investors don't know that the cannabis banking is robust. Since we've been in the sector since 2016 and underwritten more than 2,000 transactions, we've never seen one transaction ever that didn't have cannabis banking for both the borrower and the tenant and the cannabis tenant, which we verify all that stuff. So there's 704 banks listed on FinCEN's website as of the last report that are doing cannabis depositor relationships. And of those banks, which are federally chartered, state chartered, and credit unions, there's dozens and dozens and dozens that are doing lending. So it's a huge misnomer. What we really are trying to solve is two minor things from the regulatory standpoint or the business side of it. And the criminal justice is really important too, but from the business side of it, if you just eliminated these two things, it would fly through in 2 seconds, but the Democrats are never going to let that happen. Those two things would be to allow 280E to not be in effect if the state is cannabis friendly or is legal for medical. And that right there would make almost every cannabis company either profitable or significantly farther or closer to profitable on the federal level.
Okay, so let me stop you there, Rob, because you're bringing up numerous good points. But speaking on the social justice side,
Love the energy, by the way. Go ahead, Ben.
Is it frustrating that prominent Democrats in the Senate, like Cory Booker, again, sort of flip-flopping? A few weeks ago, he was signaling that maybe he would let go on his stance, and he was saying that he was supporting safe banking. And now he comes out today again and says that he needs a social justice component to it. Do you ever get frustrated, or colleagues of yours get frustrated at the posturing and the mixed signals of what it will take to actually get safe banking through?
When I wrote the comment was prior to even seeing that or knowing that information. I think that comment was earlier this week. And then that comment just came out today or yesterday. That is so normal that's what I expected. And so that to me is I'm expecting it to have no performance and nobody to do anything and everybody to never do what they say. So that's my expectation. So it doesn't surprise me. But the second point I wanted to make was regarding the other issue why everybody thinks that there's no banking is because you cannot use credit cards in dispensaries where all the sales start. Credit cards are processed on the federal system. So it's not that the banking doesn't exist, it's that you get a cash buildup at the dispensaries and then everybody has to move that cash into the banks. The other thing most people don't know is all banks can board a cannabis deposit. It's just they don't have the compliance department in place to board that cash. You got to verify it with the driver's license and everything that's necessary. So
do you see that changing?
So I don't see there's so many things that it's more nuanced than people realize. If you were to get something to happen at the federal level, and you were able to take away 280E, the government, the feds are going to want an offset for that. So that would mean you've got an excise tax. And then if you got an excess tax, it starts getting way more complicated on how you're going to roll that out and how it's going to happen and how you're going to implement it. Are you going to do it that it's just going to be in the states that are legally that are cannabis approved at this point, or is it going to be a broad policy and you're going to deschedule it or whatever? So it's so complicated. We're so far out of the barn at this point that I used to say that I don't see, even if full legislation that everybody agreed to, that everybody liked it, came to the floor and they thought they were going to have the votes. I used to say, I just don't see the states, the liberal states that went cannabis friendly first, passing that when they would be blowing up their own tax base. But I started really thinking about that. In reality, politicians only care about the very next election, and they really,
I know,
in my opinion, have no care about their constituents. It's about what it does for them today. So that might change. If my one opinion that I think
go ahead, finish your thought.
my one opinion, if you want to know what would change cannabis instantly, is if you had a major corporation that had so much gunpowder, and Amazon per se, said that we're backing cannabis throughout the country, and all they need to say is to each one of those senators in those states that is not willing to vote for it, we're going to run somebody against you if you don't vote for this. That's how you get changed instantaneously.
You think that happens?
Are you? Yeah, it happens all the time.
Yeah. Well, I want to
think about
ask.
safe banking's prospects, Rob, going into the midterms and in the lame duck session. A lot of people think that it could pass. It has at least its best chance of passing, and a lot of people remain skeptical. Obviously, it's gone through 6 times in the House without ever getting a floor vote. So, what do you think? And also, does it matter whether the passage whether McConnell is coming in, whether the Republicans win the Senate or the Democrats remain in power in the Senate? Will it matter on that?
Yeah, so the House doesn't matter. It's always going to pass the House. It passes there. Any bill will pass there. It's the Senate. And the Senate threshold is to get to 60 votes, unless you're going to do some budget reconciliation act, method. I don't think that that's going to happen. So I don't see anything getting through that threshold with the current way the Congress is structured. Now, moving through and I don't see. Some people have said, well, we're going to be in a lame duck session. We can get it through in this period of time. I just don't see either party willing to give the other party a win. It's just that divided, and there's no motivation to do it. So I don't think that's going to happen. It's much more advantageous to both parties to say we're working on it. We just missed getting it through. We need to raise some more money and just keep going and going and going indefinitely. In regarding your question on the next administration, whichever one it might be, if it is Republican, the only thing I say is, be careful what your assumptions are. In reality, it's the Republicans that have gotten through and led the legislation on the most consequential bills that have ever passed thus far. Dana Rohrabacher was who did the Rohrabacher-Blumenauer Amendment that defunded the Department of Justice from any cannabis prosecution against a cannabis-related business. That's the most consequential legislation that's ever been passed to date. Everybody blows past it. That's the only one that gives us the ability to be in the sector and not know that know that we can't be prosecuted. So that one, and the Hemp Act was the initial footprint to start being able to lay things out there to go a direction with cannabis. Now, the Democrats are more on the social equity justice, which is just as important, but you just can't get things done if you just keep lumping everything together. The Democrats aren't willing to let these easy things go through without their stuff, and the Republicans
What about
really
the NDAA, Rob?
What's that?
How about, are you bullish on the prospects of the NDAA if it's attached as an amendment to a must-pass bill? Does that change the dynamics at all in your thinking?
You would only do it. I think that is a talking point, and that every single time in the last 8 years that they've been trying to do something and saying that there's these special circumstances that they'll get it to this bill. It's never happened. So,
Right.
or it's backed out. And then remember, that's just one of the Congress, the congressional houses, either the House or the Senate. They still have to ratify it between the two. So even if you get it, to get that full bill to go through and stick on is another question.
Hmm. I'd be curious to find out too, like, even in the event that safe banking doesn't pass, like, what's some of the stuff that you hear, like the challenges that people, like, companies that they're currently facing right now within the system, like some of the stuff that you hear every single day of the challenges that they have, knowing that they don't have the proper, obviously, banking system that's in place for them.
So let's define that again into what more narrowly defined. So for depositor banking relations, those are robust tier one cash plant touching businesses that exist. Now, granted, you do have to pay a higher banking fee for the compliance on that, but that's going to be the case whether no matter what happens out there. And regarding for cannabis lending, I think that people have missed the whole issue with cannabis lending. There is many banks, we keep track of all of them that are in the sector that are lending, but cannabis is a specialty use asset class. And being a specialty use asset class, a bank is not a good lender for that. So even when you pass this, it's not going to change the bankability of these assets. Most of these assets, the large cultivation facilities, are in tax zones that are more industrialized and opportunity zones, or places that they're trying to lift up that community, which the banks aren't likely to lend in those areas, or secondary markets and where the taxes are lower. So the banks are never going to be the right type of lender for this, other than dispensaries in urban environments. So it's never going to fix the issue. So you really have to keep going down and down and down a layer to understand lending in the markets.
So what do you think is then the biggest misconception, amongst investors when it looks at safe banking? And when you talk about a lot of this stuff that you have to continue to dig under and under and under, what can you kind of teach us that maybe the average investor needs to be aware of?
Yeah, I would tell you that I don't see the biggest change that would happen in safe banking, we believe, is going to be that the financial institutions that once felt they had cover under the Cole Act, the Cole memo before it was rescinded, are going to feel that they have cover. We've been previously approved by some of the major custodial services that warehouse some of the largest exchanges in the world, and those places that cannot trade our shares or even let wires go to us. I don't want to say our name because we've been approved and we can get back up on there here eventually, but once this passes. But those institutions don't feel they have the cover unless the Cole memo is reinstated. So I used to say, we'll know on day one of the Biden administration if they're pro-cannabis, they will reinstate the Cole memo day one. It's an executive order. It's nothing. It doesn't require a vote, and that has not happened today. So that the safe banking.
So you had a good idea. You had a good idea as to where this was going, even on day one of the Biden administration. Is that correct?
Yeah. If you look at all my interviews, I said that, look, I don't see this happening, but we'll have a tell day one if they reinstate it, because that's their initiative. Everything that is a important issue is going to be announced in day one. They've thought about it for 2 years.
So what should investors what's the investor takeaway if safe banking doesn't come, and then no federal reform is on the horizon, and you have Mitch McConnell getting back as Senate Majority Leader? What do you tell investors that in the community about how to handle a situation like that, where you could have regulatory stalemate for 2 years or more?
So I would tell people that your strategy for investing, whether it's in a cannabis direct operator or in a fund like ourselves, you need to invest in a way or in a methodology that is not dependent upon it becoming federally legalized or deconflicted for your strategy to win. Mm-hmm. That is never a winning strategy in the entire planet. If you're betting on the government to do something, at best it's going to take longer, and at worst it may never happen. It always has unintended consequences to the way that they do it. Be careful what you wish for sometimes.
Right. Do you think, as much as we talk about this like nonstop, from a political landscape that this whole topic of cannabis has become even more complicated over the last 2-3 years, because just when we're starting to feel that we're making some sort of progression, when I hear you kind of explain things as to what goes on behind the scenes, like I get dizzy just thinking about it, going, this is beyond complicated, beyond my wildest dreams. Like there's really a lot of stuff I'm unaware of and what I don't know as to what's going on behind the scenes, which is why it's become so complicated. And the main reason why a lot of investors right now are just completely walking away from it all.
Yeah. If your strategy doesn't require that, like, these companies can make money. There's other issues than just the legalization. There's the taxing and the enforcement. There's so many layers to this that have made it complicated. And I think that for a broad category, everybody focuses on, legalization or deconflicting state policy from federal policy. But in the reality, even if you get full legalization or if you get, any other form of it, it doesn't mean anything if nobody's enforcing it. So I'm telling you, it's like, you got to rethink your whole outlook of this and think about, okay, I've got to assume that the states are going to continue to mess up and not enforce because it's not politically good to go out and enforce this. But in reality, you just try to make it right for all the people that have been harmed, and those are the people you're giving the licenses to, and those are the guys that are being impacted the most by not enforcing the illegal operators, put them out of business. So it's just insane how the dynamics are. So again, I would just assume that things aren't going to change and that the states will continue to make mistakes, and think about your strategy. This is the most mispriced risk we've ever seen in our careers, bar none. And that
Really
is still the case. And this is still an asset class that is going to do better in an economic down cycle or real estate,
right.
downturn than any other asset class. And so you just got to think about it this way. Every year, there's going to be $20 to $25 billion coming through the country. That money, how it flows is going to change. Who's going to capture that? A percentage of that money in each state each time is going to be slightly different. Who's more profitable? Who is going to be able to thrive? But eventually, these companies are going to continue to find new ways to save costs and to find places to gain efficiencies and become more and more efficient. And the great thing about it is that I always say, look, just think the long game. Don't count on your strategy being dependent on making money for it to be cannabis legal or federally legalized. If if that does happen, that will make these companies highly profitable, but they'll already be so efficient by that time. It's just a big upside. So put your strategy and your thesis there, and that's where I would recommend people to think about.
Yeah.
Now, last question over here, Rob, is the California market. You're based in Newport Beach or Newport, California, and obviously you have a big pulse on what's going on there. We've seen the cultivation tax rescinded recently, but there's still a lot of enforcement issues, and it's still a big mess in a lot of ways. A couple of the big operators during their earnings mentioned that they're getting out of California for the time being, not fully out, but out of some of their operations. So, what's your take on how California is shaping up? How long is it going to be before they get everything under control and enforcement under control, and when is that going to turn around?
Sure. So again, when you talk about the California market, it's a very broad category. So there's more going on, the dynamics here, than what is talked about in those talking points of the articles out there. The California market has been pivoting from a market of all outdoor crops as farmers selling into the wholesale market, typically every October, and that flooding the market. But there was always so much demand that product was all bought up. Well, as California brands continue to make more and more of an investment in the brand, they started realizing we can't afford to have an act of God, fire, flood, pesticides ruin that crop, and we need a perpetual harvest. If we're making this big of an investment, we need to have that shelf space, the product on the shelf space every part of the year, not be dependent on the crop coming through of somebody that might not even meet our quality of control for the product.
100%.
So the brands have been slowly but surely building out their own cultivation, their own integration, and it's been pivoting, and nobody's talked about this. So almost every single one of our borrowers is an owner, an owner operator, and they're selling to themselves. And so what's happening is this market, and everybody talking about this big flood of the market is true, but that is for the brands are buying less because they're producing more for themselves, because now they're in control of their own costs, their own destiny, and have a perpetual harvest. So it's not always what you guys, what people talk about is the issue, and it'll shake out. This is not a commodity that has no life. It has a life. You basically, cannabis will last longer than 6 months, but nobody would buy it if it was on the shelf and it was more than 6 months old. So if you can't have that sold in 6 months, that product has to be destroyed or sold off to another market that's an inferior market, so whatever way it gets there. And so California will work itself through faster than any other market because it's the most efficient market in the country with the most licenses, unlimited license. You have the ultimate ability to replace tenants, the most ability for companies to continue to thrive, as opposed to limited license states that are being propped up. If legislation ever allows there to be interstate commerce clause where you can cross state lines, those states are going to get hammered because they've never had any real competition.
Yeah. And there's a ruling today actually on that.
That's interesting.
That a First Circuit Court of Appeals, I think, ruled that interstate commerce is legal, essentially. So
well,
how so?
I don't think it's you wouldn't be able to cross state lines at this point. In my opinion, I haven't seen that ruling, but that's a federal. I don't think it was applicable to cannabis. If it is, please send me the article, because you can only enforce interstate commerce if it's legal. This is illegal. So how can you enforce something that's illegal?
Right.
I want to go back to what you said about companies buying off of themselves. Can you give it an example? I want to backtrack that and how that all means so people can get a better idea as to what hasn't been talked about. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, a brand that is, what initially made their investment on a strain and a marketing strategy was buying from certain people, cultivars or cultivation places, outdoor, whatever it might be. But eventually they started, focusing in and realizing, look, even if I'm buying from another indoor cultivation where I can control the environments, I'm not in control of them. And if the markets go up or down, I don't want to have that pricing flexibility. I don't want to have that unknown. If you're selling to yourself as a brand, you just picked up. Our borrowers are typically, I think, at about $1,200 to $1,500 per pound, because they are able to sell directly to themselves, and they are making much more profit than somebody that's having to buy from a wholesaler.
Yeah. Last thing I wanted to touch on too, you basically finance the entire cannabis business, or industry. When you look at from both a private and public perspective, how is everything right now as far as the overall growth of the industry? Like, are you seeing more business more than ever compared to, like, say, it was a couple of years ago?
So that's a hard question to answer because there's other dynamics happening from our primary lending peers. In the beginning, we were the only lender, the only one that existed in the country in 2016. And as time continued on, there was up to 100 players out there today. There's a couple of other private mortgage REITs that are publicly traded. Those are about the only two that can do the size and scale of transactions that we do, that are known by borrowers, but they have a completely different modeling of how they do transactions than we do. So it's not really apples to apples. But we're always have seen more and more deals than we ever thought was possible. We've grown our originations team. Now it's up to 13 people. It used to just be 2 to handle that inflow. But part of the reason those inflows are changing is, one, different lending products that we're putting out. So originally we were just bridge lending to acquire and build the facilities. Now we have a fully stabilized loan product that we can reduce their costs once they're cash flowing. But also our peers out there, because they're publicly traded, they have different ebbs and flows of things that they can and can't do. For example, if their stock was to go below book value, they can't issue any more equity. So they're dead in the water and they've only got their lines of credit. And most people forget your lines of credit are not just for new deals. You have unfunded liabilities that you're having to cover for there. So you got to start with the unfunded liabilities and look at that first and look and see what you got. And a lot of these lines of credit, in addition, have borrower concentration limits and geographic limits. And so they may not be able to use the line as much as they were hoping to because of those limits. One other thing that most people don't realize is most of these lines of credit that are issued out there are syndicated. The syndication partners may not have been closed at the time that they closed the transaction. So they may not have that full capacity on the line.
There's a lot I was unaware of. It's been educational, to say the least. Ben, you got anything else you want to add?
No, that's it. Actually, I think Rob answered most of my questions. Great insight on safe banking in the California market. Appreciate that, Rob.
Yeah, this has been great. Needless to say, there's a lot of moving parts to the political landscape that I was unaware of, especially even in some of the cases that people are dealing with from a business perspective too. But listen, appreciate the time for checking in, and let's keep in touch.
That sounds good. Hopefully I'll see you guys at Benzinga in Chicago.
Absolutely. We'll see you there. Thanks, Rob.
All right, take care, guys.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Bye.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for watching. And if you like this video, wait until you see what we have next. Some of the best thought leaders in the verticals that we cover, from cannabis and psychedelics to cryptos and NFTs and sports wagering. So if you want to learn more, make sure to click on that bell for all notifications. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.